Welcome to The Backstory, a podcast from the North Dakota News Cooperative that takes an in-depth look at the stories we're reporting for you. I'm Sabrina Halvorson, CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. Joining me is Michael Standaert, our lead reporter. So the story we're talking about this week is the federal funding cuts prolong anxiety for North Dakota institutions. And speaking specifically about the state library and also research universities that are waiting for what are the next steps or what's going to happen next. So as you were researching this and chatting with people about the issues, what were some of the things that you were hearing?
So initially I was going to look more at the impact on the research universities, University of North Dakota and North Dakota State University, but a lot of that situation is still undecided. It's in a limbo state. So I started looking around. I'd seen other stories about how state libraries in other states have been affected by funding cuts or a pause on funding for the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which has been around since 1959, I believe. So right now, the state library in North Dakota is unsure of whether they will get their funding in this next federal fiscal year. They've been receiving around 1,200,000 or so each year for the last several years. And a lot of that money goes to supporting programs like interlibrary loan, these online databases, provision of materials to people with reading impairment, whether it's physical or visual, these sorts of things. Around a third of the state library's budget goes to or is from federal funding.
So what would it mean to them to be losing this federal funding?
So if they lose the funding, their ability to subscribe to some of these online databases would be curtailed unless they get the funding from the state or come up with the funding in some other way. Another issue is for the interlibrary loan services. A lot of the postage for sending books around the state is covered with those federal funds. So if those funds are gone, then somebody will either need to pay for the shipping costs for those books, or they won't be shipped to all the places they were before. They might have to just target the counties that don't have any library access, that sort of thing. So it could disrupt citizens' ability to get books. And North Dakota's the only state that sends books directly to people's homes.
Right. And that's quite a service for our rural residents. When you think about the type of state that North Dakota is, we have so many people who live quite a distance from a library and don't have that access. So the fact that our libraries are able to mail books to people's homes, like you pointed out, we're the only state that does that, but also we're one of the few states that really needs that service.
Yeah, definitely. There were over 115,000 books that were sent through the program, through public libraries in the state using the interlibrary loan services. There might be quite a bit more other than that number. They couldn't really say what was sent through K through 12 or higher education. So there's probably a lot more books that are sent through those services. One interesting thing that came up in discussion was, so a lot of people come and use the ancestry.com services that the state library offers if they don't want to sign up for themselves online. And that was accessed over 330,000 times in the state last year. So that was a pretty popular resource. So things like those subscriptions to online resources might be curtailed somewhat if that funding does not come through.
Yeah. What about the research end of this article, too? There are funds for research that the state is looking at losing.
Yeah, the University of North Dakota has lost at least 4 federal grants. A couple of those were Center for Disease Control grants, and a couple were National Institute of Health grants. One was for $900,000. That was the biggest one. So of those 4 grants, is about 1.4 million total that was canceled. There's a lot of remaining because there's kind of a federal case related to what the NIH can cover for research at universities in the US. Previously, NIH would cover a certain percent, and in the past, that indirect cost rate with the NIH for UND, for example, had been about 41%. I saw other places, I think it was Harvard, had 69%, so they were getting a lot of research covered with NIH grants. But the latest reform wants to put that at a 15% coverage rate for all universities across the country, which would mean that the universities themselves would have to come up with that money for research or otherwise not do the research. So they might be more discriminate about what research gets picked to be done, and there won't be as many research projects done unless they can demonstrate this cost effectiveness. And another thing that I came across was a history professor at North Dakota State University who she didn't lose her specific grant, but the grant was lost through another university, this Michigan Tech Institute. She was part of this project that she was going to be mapping the Red River Valley and up the system where the public view the history of a place, and she would look at the whole Red River Valley, target different areas in that, and peel the layers off so you could see the history going back to the glacial periods, or back to when the bison were roaming the grasslands in that area, or back to the big bonanza farm period when all the immigrants were coming into the state. And people can add, we'll probably eventually go through with this if she can get other funding, but people can add photos and they can add documents, and it's going to be a living, breathing resource for seeing the history of a place over time. But she's been impacted because the grant was pulled for the overall project that was being run by Michigan Tech Institute. Her program is disrupted right now, so she's trying to figure out whether it can get funded through other means.
That's interesting how it's not necessarily funding here, but it's going to affect a project that would have been of benefit to some of our residents.
Yeah, that's the only case I saw directly where that happened. But I mean, there's probably likely other cases where, because people are collaborating all over the US, all over the world. So it's bound to probably happen in other cases as well.
That again, reporter Michael Standaert on his latest article, Federal Funding Cuts Prolong Anxiety for North Dakota Institutions. You can read that story on our website at newscoopnd.org or in one of our local newspaper partners. For the North Dakota News Cooperative, I'm Sabrina Halvorson. This has been The Backstory.